My name is Emily Warren. I am 32 years old, a nurse in Cincinnati. And for years I worked exhausting night shifts to finally buy a small condo that was mine alone. On Christmas night of 2022, I walked into my aunt's house expecting warmth, family, and laughter. Instead, my parents stood before everyone and proudly announced they had sold the home I grew up in and given $950,000 to my brother Ryan for his new house. The table erupted in applause, but I sat frozen, invisible at my own family's celebration. And before I could catch my breath, my mother turned to me with a smile that cut deep, saying since I was single and had a steady job, they would simply move into my condo. In that moment, the Christmas lights seemed colder than ever, and I knew nothing about my family would ever be the same again. What followed after that night was a chain of betrayals, confrontations, and revelations that no one in that room could have imagined. That Christmas night, I thought I was only heading to another family dinner, tired from work, but hoping for warmth and peace. I had no idea the evening would mark the beginning of a storm that would test everything I had built for myself. I pulled into the driveway of my aunt's house in Cincinnati. The December air so sharp, it felt like it could cut through my coat. It was Christmas night of 2022, and after a 12-hour shift at St. Mary's Medical Center, my body ached for nothing more than silence and rest. But Christmas was Christmas, and no matter how tired I was, I still wanted to be with family. The windows glowed with warm yellow light, and I could see the tree in the front room, tall and glittering with ornaments we had collected for decades. When I stepped inside, the smell of roasted ham, cinnamon, and pine needles hit me. The living room was full, cousins laughing, children running around in holiday sweaters. My mother, Linda, hurried over to hug me tightly, smoothing my hair as if I were still a child. My father, Charles, gave a brisk nod from across the room, already holding a glass of eggnog. My older brother Ryan was front and center, his arms slung around his girlfriend Scarlett, who wore a red velvet dress that clung to her like she knew everyone would be watching. I set down the pie I had picked up from a bakery on my way and tried to shake off the fatigue. Ryan greeted me with a grin that felt too smug, and Scarlett gave me a little wave. Her nails painted a glossy gold. I smiled politely and joined everyone at the long dining table, the tree twinkling in the corner. The plates were filled, glasses poured, and my aunt urged us all to raise a toast. I lifted my glass, expecting the usual well wishes, but before anyone could sip, my father cleared his throat. His deep voice cut through the chatter. He announced that this year, he and my mother had made a big decision. The room grew quiet as he glanced at Linda, who nodded, her face glowing with anticipation. Then he said they had sold their house and taken all $950,000 to buy Ryan a new home in the suburbs. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. The room erupted in cheers. My cousin clapped. Some even whistled. And Ryan puffed up in his seat, squeezing Scarlett's hand like he had just won the lottery. Scarlett leaned into him, her smile wide, her eyes glinting as if she had orchestrated the whole thing. I sat frozen, the glass still in my hand. My chest tightened, and my stomach turned with the weight of what I had just heard. My parents had sold the only home I had ever known, the place filled with years of family history, and given it away as if it meant nothing. As if I was invisible. My aunt dabbed her eyes, saying how wonderful it was to see parents support their son. My uncle raised his glass to Ryan's success. Ryan beamed, soaking up the attention, while Scarlett kissed his cheek. I forced myself to put my glass down slowly before my trembling hands betrayed me. No one seemed to notice my silence. Or maybe they did and chose to ignore it. My mother finally looked at me, her voice sweet and calm, telling me she knew I was proud of my brother too. I managed a faint smile, but it felt glued on, heavy and false. Inside, a sharp sting spread through me. I had worked double shifts, covered holidays, bought my small condo downtown with every ounce of sweat I had, and none of that mattered enough for even a mention The laughter carried on. Ryan boasting about the big backyard and how perfect the kitchen would be for parties. I heard Scarlett talk about the neighborhood and how she already planned to decorate the new place. My father clapped Ryan on the back, saying this was the start of something great. I kept my eyes on the candle in front of me, letting the flame blur until my vision watered. All I could think was how easily my parents had erased me from the picture. My brother was their pride, their golden child. And I was just the daughter who worked nights and came home too tired to speak. As the meal continued, I ate in silence, each bite tasteless, every laugh. Every word of praise for Ryan was like a reminder of where I stood. The walls of the dining room felt closer, the air heavier. My body was at the table, but I felt like I was watching from far away, an outsider in my own family's celebration. When the dessert was brought out and everyone crowded around Ryan to see pictures of the new house on his phone, I excused myself quietly. No one stopped me. No one even asked where I was going. I slipped on my coat and stepped outside into the cold night air. The laughter and clinking glasses faded behind me as I walked to my car, my breath turning white against the black sky. I gripped the steering wheel, letting the silence of the car wrap around me, my chest still ached, my throat tight with words I hadn't said. Christmas was supposed to be about family, about warmth and love. But all I felt was the hollow echo of being left out. I started the engine and stared ahead at the empty street, knowing deep down this was only the beginning of something I could no longer ignore. The next morning, the streets of Cincinnati were glazed with frost, and the city was quiet in that strange hush that comes the day after Christmas. I drove back to my aunt's house for brunch, my stomach tight with dread. I knew I should have stayed away, but part of me hoped I had imagined the weight of last night, that maybe things would feel different in the light of day. Inside the house, the tree still sparkled, wrapping paper was piled in the corner, and the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls hung in the air. Ryan was already in the living room holding court, his voice booming as he showed pictures of the new house on his phone. Scarlett sat beside him, her face lit up like she had won some prize. I slipped off my coat and sat at the edge of the couch. Ryan noticed me and grinned, tapping the screen. He told me about the walk-in closet, the marble countertops, the deck that overlooked the woods. Scarlett chimed in, describing how perfect it would be for summer parties. Every word dug into me like a splinter. I forced a small smile, but I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. My father leaned back in his chair with a satisfied look, sipping coffee, like he had just finished a hard job. Well done. My mother's eyes shone as she patted Ryan's arm, telling everyone how proud she was. Then she turned to me, her tone suddenly soft and almost tender. She said that since I was still single and had a good stable job at the hospital, it would make sense for them to stay in my condo for a while. She explained it as if it were the most natural thing in the world, a simple arrangement that any good daughter would agree to. The room went still. I heard the scrape of a fork against a plate. My aunt cleared her throat but said nothing. Ryan smirked and muttered something about how it would be good for Mom and Dad to be somewhere comfortable while he and Scarlett settled into their new place. Scarlett nodded, not even looking at me, her hand resting possessively on Ryan's knee. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. My condo was not just an apartment, it was the one place that was truly mine. I had worked double shifts and skipped vacations to buy it, to prove to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet. Now, in front of everyone, my parents were suggesting that it was theirs for the taking. I swallowed hard and forced a laugh, pretending to take it as a joke. But inside, I knew they were serious. The way my mother's eyes lingered on me, waiting for a nod, the way my father avoided my gaze, told me this was not some casual comment. It was a plan they had already decided on. My cousin whispered to another across the table, and I caught the look of pity in their eyes. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I wanted to stand up and shout, to demand why my sacrifices never counted, why Ryan was always their chosen one. But the words stuck in my throat. I pushed my plate away and said I was tired from work, that I needed to rest. My mother reached out, patting my hand with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She told me not to worry, that everything would work out. That family always stuck together. I pulled my hand back gently and excused myself. Out in the hallway, I grabbed my coat, my legs shaky. I heard laughter behind me as Ryan made another joke about his future pool parties, and Scarlett's giggle floated after me like an echo. I stepped outside into the cold air, breathing hard, letting the wind bite at my skin until my head cleared. I drove back to my condo in silence. The streets empty. Snow piled against the sidewalks. My hands were tight on the wheel. I replayed my mother's words over and over, each repetition making them sharper. Since you are single, since you have a stable job, we will stay in your condo. It was not a suggestion. It was a decision. When I parked and stepped inside my building, the warmth of the lobby did nothing to ease the chill I carried. I walked up the stairs instead of taking the elevator, my heart pounding with every step. Unlocking my door, I looked around my condo. At the tree I had decorated alone, the couch where I had fallen asleep after long shifts, the shelves lined with books I had collected since college. Everything in this space told the story of my independence. I set my keys down and sank onto the couch. My throat burned with unshed tears, but anger pressed harder than sadness. Last night I thought being left out was enough of a wound, but today I saw the truth more clearly. My parents had not only excluded me, they had already decided that what was mine could be theirs. I leaned forward, pressing my hands together until my knuckles turned white. I promised myself that no matter how tired I was, no matter how hard the road ahead, I would not let them take this from me. My condo was my sanctuary, my proof that I had built a life without their help. The lights on my small tree flickered, casting shadows on the wall. I stared at them until my eyes blurred. The ache in my chest was still there, but beneath it a different feeling grew, sharper and steadier. I could not erase what they had said, but I could decide what came next. I rose from the couch and walked slowly to the window, pulling back the curtain to see the city outside. Cars moved quietly along the icy streets, the world continuing as if nothing had changed. But, for me, everything had. I rested my hand against the cold glass and whispered to myself that this was the line they could not cross. It was the first time in years I felt a certainty that cut through the fog of exhaustion and doubt. They had made their intentions clear, and now I had mine. The following evening I forced myself back to my aunt's house, partly out of duty and partly because I did not want my absence to give my parents more ammunition. The house looked the same as the night before, lights glowing, holiday music playing softly, but the atmosphere felt heavier. I walked into the dining room, and everyone was already gathered around the long table. Bowls of leftovers steaming, glasses filled again. Ryan was in the middle of a story about how the new house had space for a home office and how Scarlett wanted to turn the extra bedroom into a yoga studio. Scarlett laughed, flipping her hair back, and the table erupted in admiration. My father leaned forward, his tone carrying across the table. He said Ryan needed this start, that it was only right he received the house since he had big plans. While I was already steady on my feet with a good career, the words hit me like a slap. He did not say it as a compliment. He said it as a dismissal, as if my life was already settled, as if there was nothing more I could want or deserve. My mother nodded in agreement, her hand resting proudly on Ryan's arm. I caught sight of my grandmother Helen sitting at the far end of the table, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing slightly. She did not speak, but the crease in her brow told me she was not pleased. She glanced at me for a brief second, and I felt a rush of comfort, though she quickly returned her gaze to her plate. The rest of the family sat in awkward silence. My cousins shifted in their seats, some staring at their food, others exchanging quick glances. It was as if they were all waiting for me to nod and accept what had been laid out, to make things easy, so the evening could return to cheerful chatter. I pushed my fork around the plate, my appetite gone. My father's voice droned on about sacrifice and opportunity, about how family looked out for each other. Every sentence was like another weight pressing down on me. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, my pulse quickening. Scarlett leaned forward, smiling. Her voice honeyed as she said Ryan deserved it because he was the one taking risks. She looked right at me, as if daring me to argue. Ryan chuckled and said, I should be happy for him. That I would always have my cozy little condo to come home to after long shifts. The way he said it was sharp, patronizing, meant to put me in my place. I set my fork down carefully, my hands trembling. My throat tightened. Words caught somewhere between anger and hurt. I wanted to tell them that I had spent years building my life from nothing. That no one had handed me a house or a fresh start. That my long nights at the hospital meant I earned every inch of independence I had. But the silence around me was suffocating. I looked around the table. Every eye seemed to be on me. Waiting for me to laugh it off. To smile and show I was the good daughter. The one who never made trouble. My chest ached under the weight of their expectations. Finally, I pushed back my chair. The scrape against the hardwood floor was louder than I intended, but it silenced the room even more. I forced a tired smile and said I was exhausted from work and needed to rest. My mother reached out as if to stop me, her voice sweet and rehearsed, telling me not to take things so seriously, that everything they did was for the good of the family. I nodded without meeting her eyes and slipped my coat on. I felt my grandmother's gaze follow me, steady and sharp, though she said nothing. The rest of the table sat frozen, no one daring to speak as I walked out. The night air was bitter, biting at my cheeks as I stepped outside. I drew in a deep breath, letting the cold settle in my lungs. The muffled laughter and voices carried faintly through the walls behind me. Boutifet me la sauvé. I walked slowly to my car. Each step heavy. My heart pounded with a mix of anger, shame, and clarity. For years I had told myself that being quiet was easier. That keeping peace mattered more than speaking my truth. But standing there in the freezing dark, the echo of my father's words ringing in my ears, I knew something had cracked open inside me. The night that should have been filled with warmth and family had turned into a reminder of where I stood, of how little my efforts mattered in their eyes. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I felt the weight of that truth settle deep. I gripped the wheel and stared at the empty street ahead, my breath visible in the cold air, and realized I had finally seen my family for what they were. For the first time, I could admit to myself that I was never meant to be at the center of that table. Not in their eyes. I was the steady one, the dependable one, the one they could lean on or overlook as they pleased. And as I pulled away from the curb, the lights of my aunt's house glowing behind me, I carried with me the heavy certainty that something between us had broken for good. The streets were nearly empty as I drove back downtown, the city lights blurred by the thin layer of snow that had begun to fall. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, my shoulders aching from hours of tension that no stretch could release. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of my building, the familiar brick facade brought a small measure of relief. I climbed the steps slowly, my boots crunching against the salted walkway, and unlocked the door to the place that was mine and mine alone. Inside, the quiet wrapped around me. The small Christmas tree in the corner still glowed with the string of white lights I had wound around it a week earlier. Ornaments I had collected since college, catching the faint shimmer. I set my bag down and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle into me. This condo was not large, not fancy, but it was everything. It was the result of 5 years of double shifts, of holidays spent at the hospital instead of with friends, of choosing saving over traveling, of packing lunches instead of eating out. Every inch of it was a piece of my independence. I walked through the living room, brushing my hand against the bookshelf filled with paperbacks I had hauled from apartment to apartment before I finally had a place to anchor them. The couch was secondhand, the rug bought on clearance, the framed photos along the wall showing me with coworkers, a few college friends, and one with Grandma Helen taken last summer in her garden. Not once did I see Ryan or my parents in those frames. That realization stung, but it also brought clarity. I hung my coat on the hook by the door and moved into the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. My reflection in the dark window showed tired eyes and the faint creases of a woman who had worked too many nights, but behind them was something steadier than before. I thought about the way my father had said I was already steady enough, as if my stability meant I did not need care or recognition. What he called steady, I called survival. I carried the glass back to the living room and sat on the couch, staring at the tree lights. The thought of them moving in here sent a wave of nausea through me. The idea of Charles sitting in that armchair, Linda reorganizing my shelves, Ryan dropping by whenever he wanted. It all felt like an invasion waiting to happen. I whispered softly into the quiet that they would not take this from me. Not this. The hours blurred as I replayed the night over and over. The sound of forks clinking against plates. The weight of eyes watching me. The way Scarlett smiled with quiet triumph when my parents announced the gift to Ryan. My chest tightened at the memory. But underneath the ache, a different fire began to burn. I had spent years keeping the peace, swallowing my pride for the sake of avoiding conflict. But tonight proved that silence only gave them permission to take more. I got up and walked to the bedroom. The small space was neat. The bed made. The lamp on the nightstand, casting a warm glow. I sat down on the edge of the mattress and let out a long breath. My phone buzzed with a message from Anna, my co-worker, asking how Christmas had been. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back that it had been complicated. I did not have the energy to explain. Not yet. Lying back, I looked at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the heater. My parents had always made me feel like a guest in my own family. Useful when they needed me. Invisible when they did not. Ryan was the center of their world. No matter how many times he failed, and I was the one expected to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention remained. Tonight showed me that pattern would never change. The clock on my nightstand ticked past midnight. The city outside was quiet. Snow falling heavier now, blanketing the street in white. I closed my eyes and told myself, this condo was my line in the sand. This space, every wall and floorboard, was proof that I could stand on my own. I would not give it up to anyone. Not even them. For the first time that night, I felt a small wave of calm wash over me. Not because the problem had gone away, but because I knew what I had to protect. I pulled the blanket over me, the glow from the tree in the living room spilling faintly into the hallway, and let the steady rhythm of my heartbeat remind me of the promise I had just made to myself. The following morning, the hospital break room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. I sank into a chair, still in scrubs, my body heavy from a night shift that had stretched longer than expected. Ana Lopez, one of the nurses I trusted most, walked in balancing a cup of coffee in each hand. She set one in front of me with a smile. But the smile faded quickly when she noticed the tired set of my face. She asked if Christmas had been good. I hesitated, then told her what had happened at my aunt's house. How my parents had sold their home and given every dollar to Ryan. And how later my mother suggested they could just move into my condo because I was single and had a steady job. Anna's eyes widened, her hand frozen around her cup. She shook her head slowly, saying she could not believe they would actually say that out loud in front of everyone. I tried to brush it off, but the words tumbled out faster the longer I spoke. I told her how Ryan had basked in the attention, how Scarlett had smiled like a queen, and how my father dismissed me as already steady enough, as if my hard work meant I no longer mattered. Anna leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. She said I needed to check the truth for myself, to see if my parents really had sold the house the way they claimed. Her suggestion landed like a spark. I had accepted their words as fact because that was the story they told. But deep down, something felt off. They had owned their home outright for years. No mortgage. No debts that I knew of. Why would they suddenly decide to sell and hand everything over to Ryan? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. When my shift ended, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and stared at my phone. The cold air seeped through the windshield as I scrolled to a name I had not dialed in months. Mark Dawson. We had met in college, and while life had taken us in different directions, he had stayed in Cincinnati and built a reputation as a solid real estate attorney. I pressed the call button before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring. His familiar voice, warm. I told him quickly what I needed. That my parents claimed to have sold their home, and I wanted to confirm it. He did not ask for details right away. Only said he could look into the property records and get back to me within a few days. His steady tone was exactly what I needed. I thanked him, my voice breaking a little, and he told me to hang in there. When the call ended, I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. The parking lot was emptying as the morning shift arrived. Nurses walking briskly through the cold, with their bags slung over their shoulders. I stayed there a while, the weight of everything pressing down, until I finally turned the key and drove home. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook in front of me, writing down every detail I could remember from the last few days. My parents' words, Ryan's smug grin, Scarlett's laughter, my grandmother's silence, it all spilled out onto the page. As I wrote, memories from years earlier surfaced uninvited. I remembered being 16, sitting in the bleachers at Ryan's basketball games while my parents cheered until they were hoarse. They never noticed that I had skipped shifts at my part-time job to be there, that my homework was undone. I remembered being 20 and paying my own way through nursing school, working nights at a diner while Ryan dropped out of college and came home to live rent-free. My parents always said he needed time, that he had potential. One memory hit hardest. I was 24 when I bought my first used car outright. Proud of the savings I had scraped together. My father barely looked at it. But when Ryan leased a flashy sports car with money he did not have, my parents gushed as if he had achieved something monumental. I had smiled through it, biting down the bitterness, telling myself it did not matter. But it did. It mattered more than I wanted to admit. As I wrote, the pages blurred through tears of frustration. Every line confirmed the truth I had buried for years. I had always been the one overlooked, the one expected to manage on her own while Ryan was coddled. Forgiven. Celebrated. My parents had built their lives around him, and now they had sold their home to bankroll his next chapter. I closed the notebook and pushed it aside, my chest tight with anger. The quiet of the condo pressed in, the hum of the heater, the only sound. I rose and walked to the living room, staring at the tree still glowing faintly in the corner. It no longer felt like a decoration, but a witness. Standing silently as my world shifted, my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. Short and to the point. He would start digging through county records the next morning. Relief mingled with dread. Soon I would know for sure, and there would be no turning back. I sat down on the couch, pulling the blanket around me, my mind racing. For years I had swallowed every slight, told myself to endure because it was family. But family had crossed a line I could no longer ignore. My heart pounded with the memory of Christmas dinner, with the sound of Ryan's laugh echoing in my ears, with my father's voice telling me I was already steady enough. The tree lights flickered, and I whispered into the room that they had taken enough from me, my condo, my life, my hard-earned independence. These were mine, and no one was going to decide otherwise. My voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. I leaned back against the cushions, closing my eyes. The exhaustion of work still clung to me, but beneath it was something sharper, steadier. The anger that had simmered for years had finally broken through, and I could feel it settling into place. I did not know yet how deep this would go, but I knew one thing with certainty: the truth was coming, and I was ready to face it. Saturday morning, I drove through the quiet streets of Montgomery, a suburb just outside Cincinnati, where my grandmother Helen lived. Her small house with the blue shutters sat at the end of a tree-lined street, smoke curling from the chimney into the gray sky. The moment I pulled into the driveway, the tightness in my chest loosened a little. Her home had always been the one place where I felt safe. She greeted me at the door in her thick cardigan, her silver hair pulled back in a bun, and the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon filled the air. She pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than I expected, then guided me into the kitchen where the table was already set with 2 mugs and a plate of buttered toast. We sat across from each other, and I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Unsure how to begin, Helen watched me quietly, her sharp eyes studying my face the way only she could. Finally, she asked if I was holding up after Christmas. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge beneath it, as if she already knew the answer. The words spilled out before I could stop them. I told her about the announcement, the $950,000 given to Ryan, the way everyone applauded, and the moment my mother suggested moving into my condo, I felt the heat rise in my cheeks as I relived it. The humiliation pressing against me again. Helen's lips pressed together, and she shook her head slowly. She leaned forward, her voice firmer now. She said she would not sugarcoat it, that my parents had indeed sold the house, and all of the money went to Ryan. She paused, letting that sink in, then added that the decision was made because Ryan claimed he had a startup idea, and Scarlett had convinced them it was a golden opportunity. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. Hearing it confirmed out loud made my skin prickle. I asked if she was certain, and Helen nodded without hesitation. She told me she had overheard conversations weeks earlier, and when she questioned them, Charles brushed her off, and Linda insisted they had to support Ryan no matter what. The coffee in my mug suddenly tasted bitter. I set it down and gripped the edge of the table, my hands trembling. So it was true. They had not just favored Ryan. They had gambled everything on him, and Scarlett, the betrayal sank deeper than I had imagined. Helen reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. She said she knew it hurt, that she had watched for years as my parents bent over backward for Ryan while expecting me to take care of myself. She admitted she had hoped they would grow wiser with age, but instead they had doubled down on their blind faith in him. But anger rose stronger. I asked what made them believe in him so completely, when his track record had been nothing but failures. Helen's voice softened. She said parents sometimes cling to the child they think needs them most, convincing themselves that one big break will fix everything. She sighed and added that Scarlett was clever. Too clever. And she had wrapped Ryan around her finger with promises of wealth and success. The name Scarlett landed like a stone in my stomach. I pictured her that night in her red velvet dress, smiling as though she had orchestrated the entire evening. Now I saw it clearly. She had. She was the one pulling the strings. And my parents had handed over nearly $1 million because of her. I leaned back in my chair, the anger pulsing so strong it almost drowned out my grandmother's words. Memories came flooding back again, this time sharper. Ryan dropping out of school. Ryan asking for money. Ryan moving back home with no plan. Each time my parents excused it. Each time they called him a dreamer. Now Scarlett had given his dreams a face, and they were willing to risk everything. Helen squeezed my hand, pulling me out of my thoughts. She told me she worried for me, that my parents' plan was not just about helping Ryan, but about cornering me into giving up my home. They believed I would not fight back, that I would let them move in out of guilt. Her words cut deep, because they were true. That had always been my role. The one who bent, the one who stayed silent. I shook my head and told her not this time. I could feel the determination tightening in my chest, my voice shaking but firm. I said my condo was mine and they would not take it from me. Helen's eyes softened, pride flickering across her face. She told me she believed me, that I was stronger than they gave me credit for. The rest of the morning passed in hushed conversation, Helen sharing more details she had overheard. She had seen Charles meeting with a realtor in early December. She remembered Linda bragging to one of her church friends that Ryan's new venture would put the family name on the map. Each story added another layer of betrayal, another confirmation that they had built their lives around Ryan's fantasy and erased me in the process. When I finally rose to leave, Helen walked me to the door and hugged me tightly. She whispered in my ear that I did not owe them anything, that protecting myself was not selfish but necessary. Her words wrapped around me like armor. The cold air outside stung my cheeks as I walked to my car. I slid into the driver's seat, the silence pressing in, and stared at my hands on the steering wheel. For years I had accepted being second. But that morning, sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, I had seen the truth clearly. Scarlett was manipulating Ryan. My parents were blind to it, and they all expected me to carry the weight when their dream collapsed. I started the engine, the sound breaking through the stillness, and drove back toward the city. Snowflakes drifted against the windshield, the sky heavy with gray. My chest burned with anger, but beneath it a colder, sharper clarity took hold. I knew now who I was up against, and I knew how far I would have to go to protect what was mine. A week later, I was folding laundry in the living room when a sharp knock rattled my door. I glanced at the clock, not expecting anyone, and peered through the peephole. My breath caught when I saw my parents standing there, each with a bag in hand. My stomach clenched as I opened the door a crack. My mother smiled as if this were the most natural thing in the world. She said they had decided it was best to go ahead and stay with me for a while. My father stepped past me without asking, dragging his bag inside. My voice stuck in my throat for a moment before I managed to tell them they could not just show up and move in. My mother brushed off my protest with a wave of her hand. She said I had plenty of space, that my condo would feel warmer with them here, and that it was only temporary. My father muttered that family looked out for each other, his tone carrying the weight of command. I took a deep breath and reached for the folder I had left on the coffee table. Mark had sent me the documents earlier that week, proof of the sale of their house and the transfer of $950,000 into Ryan's name. I held the pages out, my hands trembling but firm. I told them I knew everything, that they had not lost their home in some tragic twist, that they had willingly sold it and handed over every cent to Ryan. My mother's face went pale. She stammered that it was complicated, that I did not understand. My father's jaw clenched as he snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them with narrowed eyes. When he looked back at me, his face twisted with rage. He demanded to know who had told me, his voice rising. I stood straighter, refusing to shrink. I said it did not matter who told me. The truth was there in black and white. I told them they had lied to me. And worse, they had shown up at my door expecting me to fix the mess they had created. My voice cracked, but it carried. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the hum of the heater. My mother's eyes welled with tears, her hands wringing together, but she said nothing. My father stepped closer, his face red, his fists clenched. He shouted that after everything they had done for me, this was how I repaid them, by throwing their sacrifices back in their faces. Before I could answer, his hand came down hard against my cheek. The sting exploded across my skin, my head snapping to the side. For a second, the world blurred. My knees wobbled, but I caught myself on the arm of the couch, my breath shaking. I touched my cheek, hot and throbbing, and stared at him in disbelief. My mother gasped, covering her mouth, but she did not move toward me. The silence stretched, broken only by my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My father's chest heaved, his eyes wild. But I saw something else flicker there too. The shock of what he had just done. I steadied myself, my voice low but unyielding. I told them they had to leave. I said I would not be their scapegoat. I would not be the one to carry their mistakes, and I would not let them live here. My mother pleaded, saying they had nowhere else to go, her tears flowing freely now. My father muttered that I was ungrateful, that I was choosing strangers over blood. I stood my ground. My hand was still pressed to my cheek, the heat radiating through my skin. But my voice grew steadier with every word. I told them they had 30 minutes to pack their bags and walk out, or I would call the police. My mother cried harder, sinking onto the couch, whispering that I could not mean it. My father glared, his fists still tight, but he did not step toward me again. The air between us was heavy, thick with years of unspoken resentment, finally breaking loose. I moved to the door and opened it wide, letting the cold winter air sweep into the condo. My heart raced, but I held their eyes. I told them once more they had to leave. For a long moment no one moved. My mother's sobs filled the silence, and my father's glare burned into me. But I did not flinch. Finally, I walked back to the kitchen, grabbed my phone, and held it in plain sight. I reminded them that if they stayed a minute longer, I would dial. The threat was no longer just words. I stood there, the hum of the refrigerator loud in the stillness, waiting to see if they would test me. My cheeks still stung, my chest tight, but the resolve inside me felt like steel. They had crossed a line that could never be undone, and I was ready to face whatever came next. I dialed 911 with my thumb steady on the screen, my eyes never leaving the two people standing in my living room. The operator's calm voice filled my ear as I gave my address in downtown Cincinnati and told her my parents were trespassing in my condo and refusing to leave. She said officers were on the way. I ended the call and set the phone down on the counter so they could see I was not bluffing. My mother let out a sob that rattled through the room, pleading that I did not need to go this far. My father muttered something under his breath, pacing by the window like a caged animal, his fists clenched tight. I stood tall, my heart racing, but I did not move toward them. The knock came 15 minutes later, firm and sharp against the door. My father froze, his jaw tightening, while my mother looked at me with tear-streaked cheeks, shaking her head as if to beg me to pretend no one was home. I ignored her and opened the door. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence filling the small entryway. The taller of the two introduced himself as Officer Simmons, his voice steady and authoritative. The younger one, Officer Green, stood just behind, his eyes scanning the room quickly before settling on me. I explained clearly, my voice trembling, only once, that my parents had come here with bags and refused to leave. I held up the folder Mark had given me and then my condo lease papers. My name and address, printed in bold across the top. Simmons looked over the documents carefully, then turned to my parents. His tone was even but firm as he asked them to show proof of residence. My father's face turned red. He said it was his daughter's duty to take them in. That family did not need paperwork. Simmons did not flinch. He repeated that without legal claim to the property, they could not stay here against my will. My mother broke down then, her voice cracking as she cried that they had nowhere else to go. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back, pressing myself against the counter. My father exploded, pointing at me with fury in his eyes, calling me ungrateful, saying he had raised me and now I was throwing them out like strangers. Officer Green stepped forward then, his voice sharper. He warned my father to lower his tone and back away from me. My father glared at him, then at me, but finally took a step back. By now the voices had drawn attention. I saw movement in the hallway outside, neighbors peering from their doors. Robert Jenkins from next door leaned against his frame, arms crossed, his face hard as he watched. Others whispered, the sound carrying in the quiet corridor. Heat rose to my cheeks, but I forced myself to stand steady. Simmons told my parents they had 10 minutes to gather their things and leave voluntarily. If not, they would be escorted out. My father cursed under his breath, stomping to the corner where his bag lay. My mother dragged hers slowly, still sobbing. She looked at me again, her face blotchy with tears, asking how I could do this to my own parents. I did not answer. I walked to the door and stood beside it, holding it open as the minutes passed. The hallway air was cold against my skin, but I welcomed it. My cheek still ached where his hand had struck me earlier, the throb matching the beat of my heart. Finally, they moved toward the door, their bags dragging against the floor. My father stopped in front of me, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a rage I had never seen before. He leaned close, his voice low, but loud enough for the neighbors and officers to hear. He said I was no daughter of his anymore. The words sliced through me like glass, but I did not flinch. My mother clutched his arm, her sobs louder now, begging him to stop, begging me to reconsider. I turned my eyes away, focusing on the frame of the door instead of her face. Simmons and Green stood ready, watching every move. Their presence, a wall between us and another explosion. With one last glare, my father stepped into the hallway, dragging my mother with him. The neighbors' whispers rose, some shaking their heads, others muttering quietly. Robert caught my eye for a brief second and gave the smallest nod, a silent acknowledgement that I was not alone. I closed the door slowly, the latch clicking into place. The condo was suddenly silent, except for the hum of the heater and my own uneven breaths. I leaned against the wood, my hands trembling, my body heavy with exhaustion and something else. A strange calm that came with finally drawing a line that could not be crossed again. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of their control lift, even as the ache of their words lingered. I pressed my hand gently to my cheek, then let it fall away. The room was mine again. The silence mine. The air mine, and I knew that no matter what storm came next, they would never take this place from me. The following week, I walked into St. Mary's for my shift and immediately felt the change in the air. Conversations quieted as I passed, eyes darting away too quickly. A coworker I usually joked with at the nurse's station offered only a stiff smile before turning back to her computer. The warmth I was used to had been replaced by something sharper, colder. At first I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things after everything that had happened. But by lunchtime, I could not ignore it. In the break room, I overheard two aides whispering near the vending machine. They spoke in hushed voices, but the words reached me clearly. They said it was unbelievable that someone could throw their own parents out onto the street at Christmas. One of them shook her head and said, "She thought I seemed nicer than that." My stomach dropped as the realization sank in. My parents were spreading lies. I sat down at the corner table, my food untouched, my chest tight. Anna came in a few minutes later and slid into the chair across from me. She leaned in close, her eyes serious, and told me that my mother had come by the hospital earlier in the day. She had been crying, telling anyone who would listen that her ungrateful daughter had kicked them out of her condo. My father had joined in, saying they had nowhere to go and that I had humiliated them. The room tilted for a moment. As Anna's words landed, it was not enough that they tried to take my home. Now they were determined to ruin my name. Years of long shifts, compassion with patients, building trust with doctors and staff, all of it could crumble under the weight of their story. Anna reached across the table and squeezed my hand, whispering that she knew better, that she had seen how I carried myself, but her eyes betrayed concern. She knew how fast gossip traveled, how reputations could unravel in the sterile halls of a hospital. By the end of the day, the whispers had grown louder. A surgeon I worked with often barely acknowledged me, his expression stiff. In the elevator, I heard two nurses from another floor mention my name, followed by the words, "heartless and shameful." I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. When I got home that night, I collapsed onto the couch, the glow of my small Christmas tree mocking the chaos that had replaced joy. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady my breathing. The silence of my condo no longer felt like peace. It felt like isolation. The next morning my phone buzzed with a message from Robert Jenkins, my neighbor. He said he had overheard Charles and Linda talking to someone in the hallway of our building. They were telling the same story, claiming I had locked them out with nowhere to go. Robert ended the message by saying he knew it was a lie, that he had seen the police escort them out, and that he would stand by me if I needed a witness. My chest tightened with gratitude, but the sting of betrayal still burned. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold, staring at the folder Mark had given me. The proof of their sale sat inside, undeniable evidence. And yet, in the court of public opinion, their tears and my silence were turning the tide against me. The following Sunday, I forced myself to attend service at the church I had grown up in. The moment I stepped through the doors, I felt the shift. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes followed me down the aisle. My parents were seated near the front, my mother dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, my father's arm around her shoulders. Their performance was flawless. Afterward, as people mingled near the coffee table, I caught fragments of whispers. Poor Charles and Linda. Can you imagine being abandoned by your own daughter? Some shook their heads when they looked at me. Others avoided my gaze altogether. The shame rose hot in my chest. but beneath it was anger, sharper than ever. Back at the condo that evening, I stood by the window watching the snow fall over the city. I thought about every hour I had worked. Every night I had pushed through exhaustion to care for patients. Every sacrifice I had made to build a life of dignity. Now it all dangled on the thread of their lies. I knew then that this was no longer about family drama. It was about my name, my livelihood, my future. My parents wanted to drag me down with them. And if I did nothing, they just might succeed. I pressed my palm against the glass, the cold seeping through, and made another silent vow. I would not let their voices be the only ones heard. If they wanted to fight in the shadows of gossip, then I would drag the truth into the light. The city lights flickered against the falling snow, and I turned away from the window, the weight of the decision settling into my bones. The lies were spreading fast, but I knew exactly where I would go next. The next morning, I called Mark Dawson and asked if we could meet. His office was in a modest brick building near Fountain Square in downtown Cincinnati. And when I walked in, the warmth of the lobby felt like a shield against the biting wind outside. Mark greeted me with the same calm presence he had in college. His suit crisp, his eyes steady. We sat down across from each other at a long oak desk, and I began to tell him everything. I spoke about Christmas dinner, the announcement of the $950,000 house gift, my mother's suggestion that they move into my condo, the night they showed up with bags, the slap across my face, the police escort, and now the whispers at the hospital and church. My voice cracked when I told him about the way coworkers had looked at me, the way patients' families had overheard gossip in the hallways. It was more than humiliation. It was an attack on the career and reputation I had spent my entire adult life building. Mark listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally, his hands folded on the desk. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and said this was defamation. Plain and simple. He explained that what my parents were doing was not just cruel, it was legally damaging. And I had every right to take action. The word lawsuit sent a ripple through me. Part of me still hesitated, still recoiled at the thought of dragging my parents into court. But then I pictured my father's hands striking my cheek, my mother's tears weaponized in the hospital hallways, and Ryan smirking while Scarlett looked on. The hesitation hardened into resolve. Mark laid out what we would need: witnesses who could testify to what had really happened, proof that the rumors being spread were lies, and evidence that those lies had caused damage. He asked if I could think of people who would stand with me. My mind turned instantly to Grandma Helen, who had heard the truth about the house sale before anyone else, then to Robert Jenkins, who had seen the police escort my parents out of my condo, and Ana Lopez, who had been in the break room the day the whispers began, who had seen my mother walking through the hospital spreading her story. I gave Mark their names, my voice firmer than before. He nodded, jotting them down. He said he would contact them and prepare statements. He assured me that the law was on my side, that truth and documentation mattered more than tears and gossip. As he spoke, the tightness in my chest began to loosen. Fawixi filkona, as if I were being smothered by a story I could not control. Now, sitting in that office, I realized I had a way to fight back. We spent hours going through details. Mark asked precise questions about dates and times, about exactly what my parents had said, about the sequence of events from the sale of their house to the moment the police escorted them away. I answered carefully, my memory sharp from replaying each scene night after night. Every word felt like another brick laid in the foundation of something strong enough to stand against them. When I left the office, the sun had set, the streets lit by rows of holiday lights still hanging across the square. The cold cut through my coat, but for the first time in weeks, I felt warmth rising from inside. Over the next few days, Mark called regularly with updates. Helen had agreed immediately, her voice steady, as she told him she had heard Charles and Linda talk about selling the house to fund Ryan's venture. Robert said without hesitation that he would testify to the night of the police visit, that he had watched them being escorted out. Anna promised to describe what she had seen at the hospital, her own frustration clear when she told Mark how damaging their words had been. Each confirmation strengthened me. It was not just my word against theirs. I was not alone in this. By Friday, Mark called to say the complaint was ready. My heart pounded as I drove back to his office, my hands gripping the wheel. When I arrived, he slid the stack of papers across the desk. My name was written clearly on the top, followed by the words Plaintiff versus Charles and Linda Warren. He explained the process, how the suit would be filed with the Hamilton County Court, how my parents would be served, how the next steps would unfold. His voice was calm, professional, but I felt every word like a drumbeat. This was no longer a private family conflict whispered behind closed doors. This was official. This was real. Mark handed me a pen and asked if I was ready. I stared at the line where my signature would go, my hand trembling slightly. Images flooded my mind, of Christmas lights glittering, while my father said Ryan deserved everything, of my mother's smile as she suggested taking my home, of the sting of that slap, of the whispers in the break room. I set the pen down firmly against the paper and signed my name. Mark gathered the documents with a nod and said he would file them that afternoon. He looked at me and told me I had done the right thing, that this was about protecting not only my reputation, but also my right to stand on my own. As I stepped back out into the crisp winter air, the courthouse just blocks away, I realized the shift that had taken place. This was no longer about winning their approval or surviving their betrayal. This was about claiming my voice and refusing to be silenced. Snowflakes swirled around me as I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the parking lot. I felt the weight of what was coming, the strain of family ties snapping further apart. But underneath it all was something stronger than fear. I knew I had crossed into a new battle, one that would define more than just my holiday. This was now a fight for my name, my work, and the truth itself. The weeks that followed blurred into a routine of court filings, phone calls with Mark, and nights spent reviewing notes and statements. My parents had yet to respond formally, but the tension in the air around me never eased. I poured myself into work at the hospital, trying to focus on patients and charts, but whispers still followed me in the hallways. One afternoon in late January, Anna slid into the break room seat across from me, her face full of something between disbelief and pity. She lowered her voice and asked if I had heard about Ryan. My stomach tightened as I shook my head. She told me quietly that one of her neighbors worked at a bank in Hyde Park and had mentioned Ryan and Scarlett had mortgaged their new house almost immediately after moving in. They had taken out as much equity as possible to fund some kind of investment scheme. I sat there frozen, the sound of the vending machine humming behind me. Anna leaned closer and said the market had crashed. Whatever they invested in had evaporated, and now they were drowning in debt. Scarlett, she added with a shake of her head, had disappeared. Rumor was she cleaned out their joint account before vanishing. I left the hospital that evening with a knot in my chest. Snow flurries swirled under the streetlights as I walked to my car, my breath fogging the air. I wanted to dismiss it as gossip, but 2 days later Grandma Helen confirmed it. She called me from her kitchen phone, her voice sharp with anger. She said Ryan had begged my parents for more help after Scarlett vanished. But by then, the bank had already moved to foreclose on the house. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, staring out at the dark skyline of the city from my condo window. Helen said Ryan had shown up on her porch, wild-eyed, ranting about betrayal. He blamed the market. He blamed Scarlett. He even blamed my parents for pushing him to dream bigger. He never once admitted his own fault. As Helen spoke, a deep ache spread through me. I remembered Ryan as a boy, chasing a basketball down our street, our mother cheering louder than anyone. I remembered him as a teenager sneaking in past curfew while I sat at the kitchen table finishing homework. He had always been reckless, always excused. Now the recklessness had caught up to him, and he had no one left to shield him. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the city noises faint through the glass. I did not feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction in watching his world collapse. There was only the heavy understanding that this had been inevitable. Scarlett had seen his weakness and used it, and my parents had enabled it with blind faith and nearly $1 million. A week later, I passed a coffee shop on Vine Street, and through the window, I saw Ryan sitting alone. His shoulders were hunched, his hair unkempt, his eyes red-rimmed as he stared into a paper cup. For a moment, I thought about going inside, about sliding into the seat across from him and asking if he was okay. But my feet stayed planted on the sidewalk. I could not save him. Not from himself, not from the choices he had made. I walked away, the winter wind cutting against my face. And with each step, I repeated to myself that this was not my burden. Back at the condo, I sat on the couch, the papers from Mark spread out before me, the tree now bare and packed away. The holidays, nothing but a memory. My parents had gambled everything on Ryan and Scarlett. And now, their golden child had nothing. I could almost hear my father's voice in my head, telling me Ryan just needed another chance. Just one more push. My jaw clenched as I thought of it. The truth was there for anyone willing to see it. Ryan had fallen, and Scarlett had left him to pick up the pieces. My parents were left with regret and shame, and I was left with the knowledge that no matter what they said about me, I had chosen the only path that made sense. I had built something steady, and I had protected it when they tried to take it. I gathered the papers back into their folder and set it on the table. The silence of the condo wrapped around me again. And for the first time, it did not feel heavy. It felt like clarity. Ryan's downfall was not my victory, but it was proof that their world, built on favoritism and blind trust, could not stand. The bank would take the house. Scarlett was already gone, and Ryan would have to face himself in the wreckage. I pressed my palms together, closing my eyes for a moment, and let the ache pass through me. I did not hate him. I pitied him. But I knew that pity would not change a thing. When I opened my eyes, the condo around me looked sharper, steadier. I could almost hear Helen's words in my ear, reminding me that protecting myself was not selfish. It was survival. And survival, I thought as I switched off the light and headed toward my bedroom, was something I had learned to master a long time ago. The day of the hearing arrived on a crisp morning in early November. The courthouse in downtown Cincinnati loomed tall, its stone steps cold under my shoes as I climbed them. My palms were damp, but my stride was steady. Mark walked beside me, carrying the file that held every statement, every piece of evidence. I clutched my bag tighter, feeling the weight of a year's worth of strain pressing against my shoulders. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with silence. My parents sat across the aisle, Charles rigid in his suit, Linda with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Neither looked at me. Ryan was not there. I wondered if shame had kept him away, or if he was simply too lost in his own collapse to face what was happening. When the judge entered, the room shifted. The proceedings began quickly. Mark rose, presenting the witnesses who had agreed to stand by me. Anna testified first, her voice calm but firm as she explained what she had seen at the hospital. How my mother had come spreading stories that were not true. Robert spoke next, describing clearly how he had seen the police escort my parents out of my condo that night. Finally, Helen's voice carried through the room with quiet strength as she confirmed the sale of the house and the reckless way my parents had handed everything to Ryan and Scarlett. I watched as my parents sat still, their faces hard. Charles shook his head occasionally, muttering under his breath, while Linda dabbed at her eyes, but her tears seemed rehearsed. When their turn came to speak, they repeated the same tired story, insisting they had been wronged, that I had cast them out. But their words faltered under the weight of the evidence. The judge listened patiently, then leaned forward. His words were clear and final. The claims made against me were false and damaging. My parents were ordered to retract their statements publicly and to pay a modest amount in damages. It was not the money that mattered. It was the truth written in the court record, undeniable and permanent. As the gavel struck, I felt a release in my chest so strong I almost gasped. Months of whispers, shame, and anger lifted like fog burned away by sunlight. My name was cleared. My voice had been heard. I glanced toward my parents. My father's jaw was tight, his eyes blazing with the same fury I had seen the night he struck me. My mother's shoulders shook as she wept softly, but I felt no triumph in their downfall. Only a quiet certainty that I had done what I needed to do. Outside the courthouse, Helen slipped her hand into mine, her grip warm and firm. She looked up at me with eyes full of pride and said I had done right. That standing up for myself was the only way to break the cycle. I squeezed her hand back, swallowing the lump in my throat. The weeks that followed brought a new kind of peace. The gossip at the hospital faded, replaced by nods of respect from colleagues who had seen the truth emerge. Anna smiled at me with relief one morning, saying it was good to have the air cleared. Robert stopped by my condo with a bag of groceries and a grin, telling me the neighborhood was behind me, even in church, where whispers had once burned. Silence now followed my parents, while my own presence was met with quiet acknowledgement. December came quickly, and with it, the weight of the holidays. I decorated my small condo again, stringing lights across the windows and placing a new star atop the tree. As I plugged in the lights, the room filled with a glow that felt softer, warmer than the year before. I stood there, arms crossed loosely, letting the peace wash over me. The pain of what had happened had not vanished. My parents were still my parents, and Ryan was still my brother. The ache of their choices would always live somewhere inside me, but for the first time I felt free from their hold. I had drawn a line, and I had held it. On Christmas Eve, I stood at the window of my condo, watching the city lights twinkle against the winter sky. The reflection of the tree shimmered in the glass beside me. My life was not grand, not flashy, but it was mine. Every late-night shift, every sacrifice, every tear had built this sanctuary, and I had protected it. I whispered softly to myself that sometimes justice does not come from the people who should love you most. Sometimes it comes from finding the courage to stand when no one else will stand for you. If you have ever faced something like this, if your own family has tested the limits of your strength, I hope my story reminds you that you are not alone. Share your thoughts. Tell me what you would have done. And stay with me here. Together, we can keep telling the stories that help us find our voices again.